Hi everyone, I am Marca Evelyn Nueva and I am your teacher for today's lecture. So our topic is all about perpendicular and parallel lines. Before we proceed to our proper discussion, let's know first the learning outcomes of this lesson. Take the challenge. In this lesson, challenge yourself to attain the learning outcomes. First, identify parallel lines and perpendicular lines. Second, determine the conditions under which lines and segments are parallel or perpendicular. And lastly, value the importance of parallelism and perpendicularity in real-life situations. Since you have already know the learning outcomes of this lesson, we are going to start our discussion by having an activity. Activity is entitled, Am I perpendicular or parallel? The figures below are real-life objects that form perpendicular and parallel lines. You are going to identify which image below forms perpendicular lines or parallel lines. Do you understand the direction of this activity? If yes, then let's get started. The first image is an example of, what do you think is the answer for the first image? It is an example of perpendicular lines. How about the second image? What do you think is it? It is an example of parallel lines. The third image is an example of perpendicular lines. Next, we have the fourth image. What do you think is it? It is an example of parallel lines. How about the fifth image? What do you think is the answer? Okay, it is an example of perpendicular lines. How about the sixth image? It is an example of parallel lines. Next, we have the seventh image. What do you think is the answer? It is an example of perpendicular lines. How about the eighth image? What do you think is it? It is an example of parallel lines. And last image is an example of parallel lines. Those objects that are presented are examples of perpendicular and parallel lines. And now I hope that you have an idea what does perpendicular and parallel lines mean. To know more about this lesson, let's proceed to our proper discussion. What are parallel lines? In geometry, parallel lines can be defined as two lines in the same place that are equal distance from each other and never meet. In short, parallel lines are two straight lines or more that lie in the same plane that never intersect from each other no matter how long we extend them. Let's have an illustration of parallel lines. Lines A and B are both parallel. Why we can say that? Because these two lines have the same distance apart, which is called equidistant and never meet. Okay? So let's have more examples. example number 1. Refer to the figure below. Let R be a point and K be a line not containing point R. How many lines can you draw a parallel to a line at a point not on the line? What do you think? Okay, there is only one line through the point R that is parallel to line K. Let's see if our answer here is correct. Parallel postulate. There is exactly one line parallel to a line at a given point not contained on the line. So it means that our answer in the first example was correct. Let's proceed to another example. Second example, in this figure below, what can you conclude about the three lines? In this figure, line X is parallel to line Y is also parallel to line Z. We can write using the notations X is parallel to Y is parallel to Z. This symbol is used to denote the parallel lines. Therefore, we can say that when two lines parallel to the same line are also parallel. I hope that you understand the concept of parallel lines because we are going to move on to another topic which is about perpendicular lines. What are perpendicular lines? First, two lines that intersect to form right angles are said to be perpendicular. Second, line segments and rays can also be perpendicular. Third, a perpendicular bisector of a line segment and intersects at its midpoint. Fourth, perpendicular lines are lines that intersect at right angle which is 90 degrees. Lastly, the distance between two parallel lines is the perpendicular distance between one of the lines and any point on the other line. Let's have an illustration of these different definitions about perpendicular lines. You can see we have here two lines that intersect at right angle which is 90 degrees. This is the first line. We can name this as line A, and this second line is line B. So it means that this line and this one are perpendicular lines. Let's have another illustration. The small rectangle drawn on intersecting lines indicates a right angle. So this one. The symbol, this one, indicates perpendicular of lines. We can denote perpendicular of lines as this symbol. As in, we have line XY is perpendicular to line PY. Do you agree? Since the intersection of these two lines are at 90 degrees. That's why they are perpendicular lines. And this line P is the perpendicular bisector. Let's have another illustration. Perpendicular distance between the parallel lines. So this one is the perpendicular distance between the parallel lines. Okay, so let's move on to more examples. Prove that two lines are perpendicular. You must show that one of the following theorems is true. Let's have the first example. If two lines are perpendicular to each other, then they form four right angles. Let's have an illustration. If line M is perpendicular to line N, we can conclude that angle 1 angle 2, angle 3, and angle 4 are right angles. Next, second example, if the angles in a linear pair are congruent, then the lines containing their sides are perpendicular. Let's have an illustration. If angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair and angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, then L sub 1 is perpendicular to L sub 2. Let's have the last example. Example number 3. If two angles are adjacent and complementary, the non-common sides are perpendicular. Let's have an illustration. If angle CAR and angle EAR are complementary, means the sum of these two angles are 90 degrees, and also these two angles are adjacent, then line AC is perpendicular to line AE. That's all for my discussion about perpendicular lines. If you have questions about parallel and perpendicular lines, you may type your questions in our comment section. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you gain knowledge about this lesson. Bye-bye!